So I want to talk for a few moments about the highest, the holiest, and the healthiest thoughts that can ever enter the human mind. Mankind was made to think. We start thinking from our earliest ages, all through life. We think. Like when the father was asked, does your daughter think about boys all the time? And he said, no, not all the time, but when she does think, she thinks of boys, you know. They have thoughts going many different directions. From littlest childhood, we think. Thinking is what puts us in the category of God. He's a thinker. The animal kingdom is ruled by instinct. And so they kind of act only glandularly, according to pre-programmed instincts. And those pre-programmed instincts that have been put into animals vary from one species to another. And as we reach adolescence or teenage years, our thinking becomes even more increased, as well it should. At a very young age, young people begin to develop a philosophy. Teenagers are looking for answers to the issues of life and the great ideas that ultimately will form and shape their future. Whether for good or bad, whether for success or failure, at the most rudimentary level, thinking, and learning to think accurately, to contemplate, to give deep consideration to all aspects of life leads to the development of what we call a worldview. This particularly human and divine function is carried out around the world, in every culture, in every nationality, in every ethnos. And one of the problems of the American culture today is we don't think about what we think about nearly as often as we should. Sometimes our environment detours our thinking or distracts us from thinking. And so by times a visit to the mountains or a visit to the seacoast or a place of solitude is necessary, because we live so culturally close. And that closeness is both geographic for those of us who are city dwellers, and the information technology forever in front of our eyes in ever encroaching measures prevents, in many cases, serious thought. And that's why the scriptures advise stillness. Be still. Because there is a lot to be heard in the quiet. The solitude. Now, at the front end this morning, I want to spend a few moments on the subject of why what you think is important, okay? And then what I want to do is progress into what I have found to be the greatest thoughts of the whole universe. And I'm sensitive about this, if you couldn't tell already. My sensitivity comes from two sources. One, the scriptures warn us not to cast our pearls before swine. And I feel very safe with you today. There's no swine here. We're not to take that which is holy and throw it to the dogs. So there are things of great contemplation and of great weight that must not be shared with some because they would trample them under feet. The other source of my sensitivity is I can't speak for you, I can only speak for me. That over my lifetime, I have had thoughts range from extreme wickedness to ultimate holiness. And it has been my main business in life to shut down that which is wicked. Amen. And to embrace and to hold dear, and to give you the scripture description of this, to hold captive every thought to the obedience of Christ. That has been my main endeavor. And so this morning I'm sensitive because I want to tell you the thoughts that have most impacted my heart and mind. I want in a few moments from now to take you to the most sacred place I can ever take a human being. And so I'm going to ask you, when I finish this first section and we enter this thing about the thoughts of God, to go with me gently, respectfully, earnestly, cautiously, because they are such holy ideas. So let's get started just now and talk about the importance of thoughts. There are two that I want to bring before you, otherwise I would never get to the main subject today. Number one is that thoughts always produce outcomes. Every action comes out of thought. every inaction. Every word that one speaks comes from thinking a certain way. And there are different kinds of thoughts that produce different kinds of results. In this scripture, I just chose to illustrate it. It's, I don't know what's going on with my computer here. Huh? These are the thoughts of the diligent. And diligent thinking people end up with plenty of. But anyone who is hasty, that is, doesn't take time to think about it, will end up in poverty. And so God says, I spread out my hands all the day unto the rebellious people, which they walk in a way that's not good. Now watch, the way that's not good comes after their thoughts. So thoughts always lead somewhere. That's why great consideration ought to be given to what we think. Now this is an old diagram, but I want to refresh your memory with it and let you see it. This is Daniel. No, I mean this is you. And in fact, let's get rid of this top line here. And thoughts come from every which direction. I mean, thoughts come at us from what we see, smell, taste, feel, and hear. Thoughts come from memory. Thoughts come from God. Thoughts come from evil sources. Thoughts just come. But also I want you to notice that thoughts are directly connected to the condition of our heart. In other words, if we had all these thoughts up here, coming from every which way, the condition of the heart at this level will somewhat determine, in fact, in main, will determine which of these thoughts we allow in here. So the heart is directly connected to thinking. So, if we take a group of thoughts and we ponder them, they will produce emotions and feelings in us, and those emotions and feelings will always lead to attitudes and actions. Always. Because thoughts have consequences to them. They have results. And watch this now. Based on the quality of this thought will determine the quality of this feeling and the quality of the attitude and action. For example, if a person was to think a lust thought, a lust thought here, then what's going to happen is they're going to get a lust feeling, which is going to lead to a lust attitude and or action. So the thought is particularly important because it will reproduce in our lives after its kind. Follow that? Now, watch with me now, because attitudes and actions will lead to a result. And the results in our life are one of two. For every thought has attached to it a moral quality or a lack of a moral quality. It is a righteous thought or it's an unrighteous thought. Or if you move out of the area of morals, it can be a productive thought versus an unproductive thought. But there will be results because the thoughts lead to feelings which enforce the thought and cause us to have attitudes and actions which produce results. Now those results are going to either produce elation and success. You could write the word success up here if you want, or they're going to create depression and failure would be appropriate here as well. Now, you can tell, I believe, from this diagram how important your thoughts are, because they are the predominantly determining factor of all other words, motives, actions in life. Okay? Now watch with me, because I want to show you one more thing about this diagram. What happens when we think a thought, get a feeling, attitude, action, and then a result is, for example, if it is a depressing guilt or depressing thought, this thing will come back here and feed a rethought. And you think it again. And when you think something again, it takes you through this process again. And then this cycles back here. And actually what happens, this goes round and around, and you develop what the scriptures call in Romans chapter 5 and chapter 7, the old manner of life, or the habit. The habit. So you learn to think that way all the time, and it will always produce, and it gets repeated, and it becomes a way of thinking, a way of being, and this is what establishes what we become. This is what we are, because this round and round and round and around creates a habit, and that habit turns into character, either positive or negative. Now let me show you one more thing. In the same way, watch this now, that if the thought and the feeling, the attitude, and the actions were not lust, but they were loving, and they were not bitter. See, because if you get a bitter thought here, what happens if you get bitter here? Whoa, bitter, 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 bitter. And this becomes the person people know. Okay? But conversely, inversely, if the quality of our thoughts are what they should be, it comes back here and produces a like feeling, a like attitude, and we develop what's called the new manner, or the new man. Totally different from the one that was down here going this way. So we develop this new habit, new way of thinking. Everybody follow? Everybody understand? But I want you to grasp this morning now. As you know, if you've seen the video, and if you haven't got this video, you should go to nothingbuttetruth.us this afternoon, and you should choose the video called How to Control Emotions. And I give this diagram, only I'm going to take this diagram farther than what we have time to do this morning. So the reason I show you this diagram is to let you know, first of all, is that thoughts always produce outcomes. And these outcomes can be, listen to this, the outcomes can not only last a lifetime, but they can last an eternity. Sometimes I wish I had some flashcards here they could just hold up. And this one would be, warning. People have the mistaken notion, I don't know where they got it from, is that we can live without character in this life and then just kind of like believe in Jesus, that when he gets us out of here, our character will be changed. That's not what Scripture teaches. Those people have not discovered yet the value of being on planet Earth. Because the purpose of planet Earth, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And it's a journey in which we develop what we ever will be. That's why Revelation comes along and it's talking about death, and this is what it says. He that is filthy will be filthy still. Him that is holy will be holy still. Flashcard warning. This life is not to be trivialized. This culture has more distractions than any human being should ever have to endure. Your life can be totally caught up with doing that which doesn't matter, which has no consequence 5 years from now. No benefit. No benefit for the rest of your life. Only mark time. Life is a classroom for character construction. Becoming the best you can be, because at death that character quality is going to be fixed, and what we do in the next life is going to be directly related by the qualifications that we had developed in this life. Don't ever think that what you do here doesn't count. Every thought, every word, every deed is important. It's part of you. Now here's what's really good news about this. No, I'll save it till later. I'll tell you a little. I told you that in my life I've had a lot of wicked thoughts. There was a time when I had so much wicked thoughts. And I'm a teenager. And then at age 18, something happened to me that absolutely recommissioned me. And I left that behind. And Jesus Christ came in His great redemptive ability and saved me from that. And now I'm walking forward. And I'm doing really good. Go to college. Get into ministry. But even during this time, I had flashbacks. I had revisitations of wicked ideas and wicked thoughts. What helped me was to develop an intolerance to that which is not acceptable by God. And this wonderful, redemptive God does this daily renewal, rewash, reinvigorate, refresh, reboot sometimes, right? Can't tell you when it happened, but somewhere along the line, a measure of sanctification settled into my person. So predominantly my thoughts were washed and cleansed. Do you ever get thought that they come, but it isn't that these thoughts, because you cannot drive down the street and see a billboard or whatever else, check out, see all kinds of thoughts come. But the fundamental task of life is to reject that which is unholy and receive that which is holy. Accept the truth and reject the error. And that is a nano-moment second by nano-moment second activity. So, they produce results. And thoughts ultimately indicate the character and determine the condition of the heart. And that's why thoughts are really important. Because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. And evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. And these thoughts become our heart, and our heart becomes our thoughts, and these two are so directly intertwined. From within, out of the heart of man proceeds evil thoughts. So no longer do we have merely the evil thoughts extended to us by an evil culture, but if our heart is not corrected,
That's right.
then the heart will produce from the inside evil thoughts. That's why your thoughts are important, because they will ultimately condition the condition of your heart. O Jerusalem, wash your heart from wickedness, so thou mayest be saved. Now watch this. Look at the connection here. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee? Cannot have your heart in the right condition without your thoughts in the right condition as well. One quick, everybody knows this verse. Children of Issachar, the men of Issachar, men that had understanding of the times, and they knew what Israel ought to do. There were 200 of them. And we cite this verse a lot, and this is just background for the next verse. For the prince of Issachar were with Deborah, even Issachar himself, and also Barak. And he was sitting on foot for the valley. Now watch this. For the divisions of Reuben, which was a group out of this 200 people who were men of understanding and knew what Israel ought to do, look at this. Look at what they were like. There were great thoughts of heart. So this is why the thoughts are so important. All right. Now here we go. Everybody say, God help the preacher. You okay? The temperature right? Everybody okay? And so now, I want to talk to you about the thoughts of God. And then I propose this morning to actually give you some of what's in his mind. So, before we get there, though, let's take a look at a couple of scriptures. These are the highest, holiest, and healthiest thoughts. They are God's thoughts. And here's what he says. My thoughts are different from your thoughts. And your ways are different than my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. Now watch this. And my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. Watch now. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my thoughts higher than your thoughts, saith the Lord. O Lord, how great are thy works and thy thoughts. Thy thoughts are very deep. Now watch this. I want you to grasp a little idea here. The thoughts of God are as high above the heavens, above us as heavens are above the earth. They are not only high, but they are very deep. The distance from here to there is very high, but the distance from the depth to there is higher yet. And so thy thoughts, O God, are very deep. A brutish, that is, an uncultivated man, does not know the thoughts of God. Watch this now. The brutish man knoweth not. What is it that he does not know? He doesn't know that the thoughts of God are very deep. And a fool doesn't understand this. Can I kindly suggest to you this morning that the culture in which we live, generally speaking, has absolutely no idea of how great, how deep, and how high, and how holy, and how healthy the thoughts of God are. No idea at all. You can listen to them cuss by his name, utter the vilest. They can stand up and draw big crowds on university campuses and give speeches about him in such disparaging terms that apart from his amazing grace, they would otherwise be struck. The brutish don't know this. The uncultured, the uncultivated, the uncivilized man doesn't know this. Neither does a fool. Thy righteousness is like the great mountains, and thy judgments are a great deep. When God adjudicates on any matter, it is not a superficial notion or a flimsy idea. His adjudication, and you name the subject. How husbands should treat wives, how wives should treat husbands, how children should respond to parents, how parents should treat children, how a boy-girl relationship should or should not be. His adjudications on these matters are very deep. So, to violate his judgments on any matter is to transgress in ultimate terms. Oh, it just slipped here. All right, it slipped. And against the great judgments of God, judgments that are very deep. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. As God reveals deep and secret things. He knows what's in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. This is like so full that you just can't take time. But God wants to reveal unto us by his Spirit. Because the Spirit searcheth all things, the deep things of God. And he reveals them unto us. Yeah. So I'm going to start now. with God's thoughts. I want you to walk with me on really sacred ground. Now, what may be puzzling to you in the next 20 minutes is that you have known this before, and you have not given to it any weight or substantial place. And that is the tragedy of our culture. If we have learned not to comprehend, if you please, the weight of truth and the depth of substance. That's why we want you to have this. Because by the time we get through this and other studies this year, we will learn. Some of the things we've already kind of learned academically. And so it's an academic thing. Yeah, I got that. We move on to the next thing. But the impact of what we supposedly have come to know is minuscule in comparison to what God designed its impact to have on us. Okay. The thoughts of God. First of all, here's something we know. They're very high. Same scripture. They are high. Higher than the heavens are above the earth. And so I want to take you through a few of the thoughts of God, and yet there are gazillions of them, and every one of them totally awesome. Are you ready? This next thought of God is the biggest impact on my life of everything, beyond everything else. God thinks about me. Certainly he's got something better to do, wouldn't you think? When I was 18, I had struggled for a number of years before 18. I would go to bed at night and I would cry. Nobody knew it. I remember tears, hot, coming down both sides of my cheeks, wetting the pillow. And I was plagued with questions. Questions like, who am I? And who cares? Who cares? Now, I had a mother and father who did, but I kind of wrote them off because parents are supposed to be like that. I asked myself, does anybody understand me? Does anybody care? Lots of people want to extract from me, and they're willing to give something to get the extraction. Kind of a bargain, a deal, but Does anybody care about me? And then I discovered this when I was 18. When I was 17, and I started at 16, and I didn't do it every night, I did it maybe once a month. And I know this is gonna tell you more about my age than I really want you to know. But I owned a 1953 Chevy. And most of you have no idea what a 1953 Chevy looks like. You're so young. And I would drive to what's called Mile Hill outside the little town of Paris, Ontario, Canada. It's out of the town, hill, go up the top of the hill. No lights, no city lights. I'd park in the ditch, and I would get out of the car, and I would climb up on the hood and lay with my back against the windshield and stare at the skies. Wishing there really was somebody out there. I know when I was 18, the night I got saved, 3 o'clock in the morning when I got up out of the tabernacle at a camp meeting, and I went, everybody else was gone, it was just a little bulb burning, bare bulb. And I walked down to the shore of Lake Ontario, and I sat on a railroad tie, no lights. And I looked out across Lake Ontario, and that night, the moon was there, and it was like every star had a special sparkle in it. And the thing that changed my life, it was a difference between laying on my back, on my hood of my car, looking at the stars, and sitting on a railroad tie looking at the same stars, only this time, I knew. Cared about me. God thinks about you. Wow. Look at it. Many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works which thou hast done, and thy thoughts which are unto us. Then I discovered that God's thoughts to us are without number. Look at the rest of this verse. And thy thoughts which are to usward, they cannot be reckoned up in order unto thee. And look at this. If I would declare and speak of them, look at this now. There are more than can be numbered. It matters to him about you. Believe it, because it is true. Cling to his hand. He understands. For it matters to him about you. You know, he thinks about you. The frequency of his thoughts towards you cannot be numbered. It's not like he thought about you 20 years ago and has forgotten about you.
Right.
It's that he thought about you 20 nanoseconds ago and he's still thinking about you now. God lives in constant consciousness of you. Watch. How precious are thy thoughts unto me, O God. Watch. How great is the sum of them? Like how many of them are there? Watch. Watch. If I should count them, they are more in number than the sand. So come to my beach, come to my house this afternoon to the beach and pick up a handful of sand. I started doing this. I started doing this when I was a kid, picking up a handful of sand and trying to imagine how many pieces of sand I've got in my hand. I used to do that. Now I live 7 miles from Lake Ontario, and my dad would take us as a family to the beach just often, maybe twice a month on a Saturday. And I remember we always did the same thing. We had the same old blanket for I don't know how many years. We laid it on the sand. My dad had made a blue wooden crate and insulated it, and there were 2 1-gallon bottles in there, each with Freshie, Kool-Aid, orange and lemon. You had your choice. My mother had this little basket with sandwiches. That's what we did. Same sandwiches, same Freshie, same blanket, same everything, and we didn't care. We always, if we went to Turkey Point, was our favorite place. We went to Long Point, but Turkey Point was our favorite. Long Point. Turkey Point, we always put the blanket down about 100 yards from the pier. And I would pick up, it was always bright, we never went there when it was dull, it was sunny. I would pick up a handful of sand and I would separate my fingers and let the sand kind of leak through my fingers and fall back. And I'd pick up another handful of sand. I would try to imagine how many pieces of sand I got in my hand, 1 million, 1 billion. I didn't even know where numbers went. And then I would look from the blanket to the pier and I would try to imagine how many pieces of sand are there between the blanket and the pier. And then I turned 18, the year I got saved. And the very next time I got to a beach, wasn't that beach, unfortunately, would have been wonderful for nostalgic reasons, but a beach. And I picked up another handful of sand. And I looked, in my imagination, I could see the pier 100 yards away. It was as if I was sitting on the same blanket. The difference was now, when I picked up the handful of sand, and I tried to imagine how many pieces of sand are there in my hand, and how many pieces of sand between here and the blanket and the imaginary pier. And then I was struck. Because whatever that number of pieces of sand was, God's thoughts about me were more in number. More in number. More in number. All the teenage questions vanished. All my restlessness was put to calm. No longer did I lay on my pillow and fight back tears of pain. No longer did I beat my chest wondering, did anybody care about me? Because in fact, the only one who really matters did. And he loves me, and he cares about me. And his thoughts to me, listen to me, beloved. I don't want you not to get, I don't want you to cast these thoughts of God off as common. I want them to have at least the same impact on your soul as they had on mine, and still do. Now this is really interesting, how this verse goes, and I wish we could spend hours in this chapter. It's my favorite chapter in the Bible. But watch this. I look at this, I contemplate this, and I have to tell you, and this I have nothing of which to boast. But I tell you that the sweetest moments in my life, these decades later, are when I visit the same thoughts of God. You had time to read this chapter, I hope you do. It tells you that when you're in your mother's womb, God watched the substance coming together to make you. Just gelatin, yuck. Didn't have any shape to it. Thy substance, thine eyes to see my substance, yet being unperfect. And in